I had been in Chuuk Lagoon for about 10 days and I was able to repair some of the damage that I had getting there. I had fixed the sail, I had to get rid of my whisker pole, which is an important part of the rig, but I'd done several other things, and also the weather was starting to change a little bit. In the Pacific, there are two main seasons. There's the northeast trade season, which is fairly steady northeast breezes, and then it starts to change and the wind switches direction. It hadn't quite done that yet, but there were some signs that it was about to do that. And so I started off, I was leaving Chuuk, and I kind of didn't want to get stuck in Chuuk. I wanted to move on and get to the Philippines, which had always been my goal. But about 3 days out, the weather did start to change, and the wind first died and then it reversed direction, which, shouldn't have been too bad except for one important thing. My engine, there was an exhaust manifold, and that manifold began to leak. I kind of had an idea that it was going at a small amount before I left, but it got progressively worse. And this made it impossible to sleep inside the boat and run the engine. And since there was no wind, I had to do something to run the engine. So what I did, and I couldn't sleep in the cockpit, it was still too much carbon monoxide there, and that can definitely kill you. If you inhale it in your sleep, you can just go to sleep forever, so I didn't want that to happen. So I slept on the side of the boat. You can see the side here, and that's essentially what I did. I put a tarp over myself and got a little mattress and a sleeping bag, and I just stayed out there. If there was wind, I would sail a little bit, but it was very light. And it became apparent that I couldn't continue to go east the way I wanted to. And I looked at the charts and I saw that Guam was about 550 miles to the north. So I figured I would do that, and I changed my course and I went north very slowly. Sometimes I would be accompanied by dolphins that would be checking me out, and it was nice to have a little bit of company because it was really, really a long, drawn-out trip at this point. It ended up taking me 19 days to get to Guam, so day after day and night after night, I just slept outside. Now here's a little chart, a map showing my route, and as you can see, I started out in the southern hemisphere, then I crossed to the Marshall Islands, and I was proceeding due east when all this happened. So I knew at the end of that red line, that's when I had to start going towards the northwest to Guam. And, it was a detour. I'd been to Guam before. I'd actually been there 4 times before. Here I am, I'm just coming into Guam, and, it was pretty emotional for me to see land again. I hadn't seen or heard anybody, but I knew that in Guam there were large military bases and I could get into radio contact if I was somehow not able to reach the land. So I moved in. As I said, I've been in Guam a number of times before, always after some kind of disaster. It's kind of ironic. The first time I was on a military base in Yumatok that got evacuated to Guam during a typhoon. The second time I was evacuated after getting bitten by a shark with my friend. And the third time I was passing through, and I actually was out jogging and I got hit by a car and my leg was really injured badly. So I ended up taking classes at the University of Guam because I was convalescing for quite a while. So I had kind of mixed feelings about getting into Guam, but it was actually very fortunate for me to go there because, number one, it was a U.S. territory of the United States. So actually what happened was the wind became so strong when I got to the harbor, and it was right directly in front of me, that I could not go in there with the weak engine that I had. I couldn't really motor very hard. So I called the Coast Guard, and they very graciously offered to tow me in. I offered to pay them money, but they said it was no problem. They said that it was a good training exercise for them. So I was really fortunate. And right after I got into Guam, I got a car and I started to look around the island because it had been 40 years since I had been there. This is called Seti Bay, and I originally thought I might go in there, but I ended up it's better the place that I went to because there were better facilities and things like that. But the southern part of Guam is very comparatively rural. The northern part is predominantly military bases, and so this is the place called Talifova Bay where I first learned to surf. Actually, after I was injured in the car accident, my leg was pretty bad, so I got a surfboard and I surfed here 40 years ago. So since then they built this little shack, but it was really nice to see the place again and to kind of just to reminisce about it. It's really a beautiful little bay. It's kind of muddy because there's a big river, the Talifo River flows into it. And so then after that I went around the southern part of the island. This is called the Spanish Bridge. The Spanish had colonized Guam like in around 1522, and they built this structure about 300 years ago, which is still intact. You can still walk across the top of it. You had to hike down, and you can see the stonework was really very intricate, and it's survived many typhoons, and it was just a really pretty place to go and reflect. This was also a Chamorro village. The Chamorros were the people that lived there originally. This is a view from north of what's called Tumon Bay. This is Tumon Bay, and in the background you see Hagatna, which is the capital. This is a place that was the scene of some ferocious naval and military battles during World War II. They built this observatory for people to go and check out the coral reef. I used to swim here a lot after work, and I would go there and just it would be very amazing to think about how this place had changed and the battles that had happened right there. But finally I made it to where the University of Guam is, and this is Mangilao. Beautiful views of the coastline, and as I said, I'd been there 40 years before and taken some classes, and they were it was pretty emotional actually to go back there. This is the building that I originally took my classes. It's now the oldest building in the University of Guam, and I walked in here and I was offered a job right off the bat teaching science in the same classroom that I had taken classes in, which I thought was pretty neat. And so, yeah, it's been modernized quite a bit. It's a pretty nice university, and I was very happy because I was going to be teaching environmental science. You'll see that. This is the library. In the foreground you see latte stones, which are structures that the ancient Chamorros used to support their houses, and they're found all over Guam. Now, I did a trip to the north to Retidian Point. There's some beautiful beaches up there. This area is mainly owned by the U.S. military. The Air Force base is up there, but they preserve it pretty well. These caves were used by the Chamorro people before the Spanish arrived, and so you can still see some of the remnants of their society there. They they live close to the sea, and they built canoes. These are some more latte stones, and there you see like some ceramic pottery shards to the left. And as I said, these structures, you see them kind of toppled over because the Spanish seem to like to knock them over, but they're still there. You can come across them just hiking. Sometimes they're erected again, sometimes they're toppled over. But it's an interesting thing to reflect on the way the people lived back in those days. Another thing you see all over Guam are remnants of the military. That's a pillbox. This is a view of Asan Beach. This is a really important battle during the war in Guam, the battle in Guam, where the U.S. Army landed. The Japanese were fortified. They had taken over Guam in 1941, but in 1944 the U.S. military came back and they stormed this beach. I think about 1,866 people died. The United States military died, and it was a very bloody battle. And following that, they had to climb up this hill, which was heavily fortified by the Japanese, and essentially they had to regain control of Guam. And they did that using tanks and essentially marching from this point to the north. This tank I found while hiking. There was no marker on it, nothing to designate it, but it's obviously from World War II, and these are the tanks that they used to cross the island. But as you can see, there are bullet holes in it, and I believe this tank probably was ambushed and the people killed, I would assume. These kinds of things are fairly common to see in the backwoods. They don't remove things that much unless they take them to the museum. This is the National Museum there. That's a mini sub. This is a bomb that was dropped in Asan, and this is a torpedo from one of the offshore ships. There are also gun fortifications. I think this is anti-aircraft guns, and these are Japanese installations, obviously. So they have kind of painted them and preserved them. Like this is kind of up in the hills, but you can imagine the impact that these things had on the people landing there. So I moved my boat. I moved it to a marina. It was the first time I'd been in a marina since I owned the boat, and it was kind of nice. You had electricity and water, and I actually even put an air conditioner in. Now, I started teaching my classes in environmental science, and it was great because twice a week I would take them out in the field, and we would visit different places and do hikes and go in caves and things like that. This is on Asan Beach, actually, where this battle took place, but it's also preserved. It's a beautiful place now. Asan Beach has an interesting history. While the Spanish were there, it was a leper colony because there was leprosy at that time. In 1899, the U.S. took control of Guam during the Spanish-American War, and they actually made a jail, a prison for people in the Philippines who had opposed the United States invasion and takeover of the Philippines. So here's my class. We're on the beach there at Asan Beach. This is another beach slightly to the north, and we were going to visit a pond that was up there called Hidden Pond. These structures, they're limestone structures that have been undercut by the waves. Pretty interesting. So we hiked up there, and we found this tiny little lake which had fish in it, and it was just amazing to see it. And we talked a little bit about the ecology of lakes and ponds. Now, the last trip I did with them was to a river, the Talifo River, and here you see the river. We rented a boat and went up the river and looked at some old Chamorro villages and saw some of the natural heritage of the place. These are latte stones that have been re-erected, and you can kind of see how they might support foundation of a house. And this is a traditional canoe, very similar to the ones that you find throughout Micronesia. Here's the class in front of a traditional Chamorro house, and I got to ride on a carabao. So I continued around the island. This is a famous place called Yumatok Bay. This is where Magellan landed in 1521, and they built a fortification there, as the Spanish are prone to do. And so you could walk around, you could see some of the original cannon, some of the structures that they used for lookouts. This is again looking down at Asan Beach. This is looking towards the peninsula where the Navy base is. This is called Agate Harbor. Now, about this time, one of my colleagues at the university took me out in his boat, and he's an avid spearfisherman. Here's one of his friends. He just shot like a dog-toothed tuna. They're way offshore, by seamounts, and they got several that day. This is my friend posing with the fish he speared, dogtooth tuna. So it was nice to go out on my friend's boat. And this is leaving in the morning, coming back in the afternoon. You can see there's definitely some hills there. But around this time, I realized that once again I had to start moving. I wanted to get to the Philippines, so I began to sail, and my next destination was going to be to the south on the way to the Philippines. So if you like this video, please share it and subscribe. Thank you.